Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again. Time for another in our series of very basic Bible studies. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis 30, and it's a pretty long one, so let's go ahead and get started. Verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I die." She's kind of blaming her husband for the problem. But this kind of jealousy is kind of predictable when you have multiple wives, we've talked about before. Verse 2. Then Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" In other words, is this my fault? No. Verse 3. So she said, "Here's my maid Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear on my knees, that through her I too may have children." An acceptable practice back then, not something God wanted, but in their society, I guess, it was acceptable. And so he had a choice to make. If he would do that or not. So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore a son. Now, remember back when Rebekah was barren, that Isaac prayed for her, prayed that God would open her womb and give them children. And God honored that, and he did. But before that, Abraham, Jacob's grandfather, when Sarah was barren, she gave him her maid, Hagar, and he went into Hagar. No indication of prayer or trust. It was kind of like, well, God's promised me the offspring, so we got to help him out here. So instead of praying and trusting God, went into Sarah's maid, and Ishmael was born. And we know that caused a lot of problems. So in this case, we would have hoped that Jacob would have followed the example of Isaac, but he didn't. He did what his grandfather did and went into Bilhah, and she had a son. So verse 6. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me and has indeed heard my voice and has given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan. Now remember, in the last chapter, we saw 4 children born to Leah: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. The first 4 of the, as we will learn to call them later, tribes of Israel. And so here's the 5th, Dan. The first 4 from Leah, this one from Rachel. Verse 7. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. So Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed." And she named him Naphtali. Neither one of them were actually born from Rachel, but her maid. But she gets credit, I guess, under their society. Verse 9. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. So Jacob does it again. So now he's going to have children through 4 women. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "How fortunate." So she named him Gad. Verse 12. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "Happy am I, for women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. Verse 14. Now in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went out and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." Well, the footnote in my Ryrie Study Bible here says that mandrakes were an herb of the belladonna family and was considered to be an aphrodisiac. And now we see some bargaining going on for these mandrakes. Verse 15, but she said to her, "Is it a small matter for you to take my husband, and would you take my son's mandrakes also?" So Rachel said, "Therefore he may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." Again, the footnote says this is really shameless bickering and bartering here. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable. Verse 16, when Jacob came in from the field in the evening, then Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God gave heed to Leah, and she conceived and bore a fifth son. Then Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my maid to my husband." So she named him Issachar. So she sees this as a good thing. God is blessing her because she went the extra mile and gave Jacob her maid to bear some children. Now she's bearing again. Verse 19, and Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. And Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good gift. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun. Verse 21, and afterwards she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. So she conceived and bore a son and said, "God has taken away my reproach." And she named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord give me another son." So far we've seen 11 sons and 1 daughter. There may have been more daughters, but this one's mentioned because she's going to have a significant role a little bit later. Verse 25. Now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me depart, for you yourself know my service which I have rendered you." Now, Jacob's ready to get out of there. Laban hasn't treated him very fairly, but now we're going to see some more bargaining. Verse 27. But Laban said to him, If now it pleases you, stay with me. I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account. And he continued, "Name me your wages, and I will give it." Saying, what's it going to take to have you stay with me? Because I see that the Lord is with you, blesses you, and I have prospered because of that. So what do I need to do to have you stay a little longer? Verse 29. But he said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your cattle have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased to a multitude. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" In other words, you've been prospering because of me, but now I have all these sons and a daughter, and I need to provide for them. Verse 31. So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again pasture and keep your flock." And here's his offer, verse 32. "Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep and every black one among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. So he said, I want to take all the imperfect, all the blemished cattle. Verse 33. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come concerning my wages. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen. And Laban said, good, let it be according to your word. Intuitively, and I guess from experience, Laban believed he was going to be getting the better part of this deal. That the spotted and black lambs and all are going to be the minority. Verse 35. So he removed on that day the striped and spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats and every one with white in it and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the care of his sons. Verse 36. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So apparently what's happened here is Laban has separated the flock, and he's taken all the spotted ones out, all the blemished ones, and he's moved several days away from the good part of the herd. And this is kind of Laban's way. You know, he's kind of dishonest and tricky, and he sees it as a way to diminish the chances of getting a good herd out of the remaining good cattle, the unblemished cattle. But Jacob, he's also pretty smart and tricky. It says, verse 37, Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled the white stripes in them, exposing the white which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks, in the gutters, even in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, and they mated when they came to drink. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. I don't know what science there is in this. Clearly God is the one that's doing this, not the rods and all that stuff, but I personally don't understand some of this discussion other than to recognize that Jacob clearly, because he has an experience as a shepherd and a herder, is practicing selective breeding. So he knows how to breed cattle, and somehow by putting these reeds in a certain way, it affects their mating. Verse 40, And Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the striped and all of the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own herds apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Moreover, it came about whenever the stronger of the flock were mating that Jacob would place the rods inside of the flock in the gutters so that they might mate by the rods. But when the flock was feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger were Jacob's. So somehow he's selectively breeding these cattle so he gets the majority of them and also the stronger of them. Verse 43. So the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. And that's where we stop in this chapter. But Jacob continues to prosper through a combination of his experience and know how to do selective breeding, and God blessing that, blessing him, giving him an advantage over Laban. But we're going to see, yet again, that this causes some problems down the road. And just as a recap on this long list of sons, so far we have 11, representing 11 tribes. We've got one female, Dinah, who is going to play a role pretty soon, kind of in a bad way. So we have one son yet to be born to create the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's going to come later. Anyway, I hope this has been interesting for you, and that you'll check out the next lesson. In the meantime, God bless. Have a great day. Bye-bye.